I'm Michele Hausman. Welcome to my SoCal studio. Today I'm going to be showing you how to repurpose your canvases and canvas panels. Now you've probably heard there's a way you can do this, but you might not know that it's not such a difficult process. So a lot of people cut their panels up and throw them in the trash or make a big burn pile out of them. But you can have them to use again, and I'll show you how to do that. The first thing you want to do is go through all your old canvases and panels that you have stored in your loft or attic or wherever you put them, and pick out the ones to keep that are really important to you, maybe memories of workshops you've taken or friends you've painted with or travels you've made, and pick out the ones that you think you could paint over that you won't miss them 5 years from now. So make a stack of those, and then you're ready to do the hard work. So the first tool, and the most important tool you want, is a hand sander. This is a little finish sander, a Makita, and you're able to adjust what type of sandpaper you have in here. So that's the other thing you want, is a pack of sandpaper. And you can get it cut in strips, or you can get it in big sheets, and then you can cut it to fit your sander. So the sandpaper I have in here now is 100 grit, and that's pretty strong, pretty good to sand through paint. I don't paint really thick, and if you do, you might want a more coarse sandpaper. It's easy to adjust it and change it out. You just lift these little tabs, slide the paper out, and put a new one in. You're ready to go. Now we're going to do this project outside on the back deck, but I still want some protection because I'm going to be making a lot of oil paint dust. I want a dust mask, and I want gloves to protect my hands. You'll also want to have rags cut up into small pieces, because once we're done sanding these panels, there's going to be a lot of dust on them. You want a bucket of water and a trash can. So when you're done sanding, you're going to want to cover your newly sanded and cleaned panels with an oil ground. And I'm using Gamblin's oil ground here. This is a paint can opener that you can get at your paint shop. It takes care of all those dented up can lids that you use a screwdriver on, opens it really easily. Now this ground is very thick out of the can. It's the texture of marshmallow. So I also have my solvent with me and a syringe, and the syringe is to thin the oil ground. I mix up 3 different colors with my oil ground. So I have tubes of paint on hand. I like red oxide. I have a Gamblin gray medium to make a gray color, and I also have Venetian red this time. I haven't used that before, but I have 3 different colors because I'm going to do a whole set of panels and canvases at once. And I can choose different colors for different panels. Also, if you want this ground to dry quickly, because it may take 5, 6, 7 days to dry, you can put a thin coat of liquid or another oil medium on your canvas first before you put your ground on. I like to use a really stiff bristle brush because you want to work this ground into all the nicks and crannies of your painting surface so that you're going to cover the whole thing. I also have a foam book here to put behind a canvas. If I'm painting over a stretch canvas or sanding over a stretch canvas, it gives the canvas some support from behind. And because of all the dust in the air, I don't want to use a really good art book. So this foam book works just great.
Well, here I am outdoors on the back deck at the studio. I've got my mask and gloves on, and I'm ready to go.
I'm looking at this panel to see where the thick areas of paint are located. Then I'll know where to spend more time with the sander. So now we're ready to sand. Let the sander do the work for you. You don't have to push down on it. You just guide it along the surface of your painting. Maybe hover a little bit longer on the spots where the paint's thick. Give your sander a chance to work. I'm going to go over the entire surface so I end up with a smooth panel when I'm done. I can use my hand and kind of feel the texture, feel the surface, so that I know if I've spent enough time with the sander and gotten it smooth. Once we have the surface sanded, there's a lot of loose pigment in a powder form that's all over the surface of this canvas panel. So I wet a rag and I'm wiping off all that dust. It's just pigment dust. And we have to remove that before we can put a nice smooth coat of primer over that. Take your time and get it really cleaned up. You're done when your rag no longer turns color when you wash it. So if you're sanding a stretched canvas, you want to support underneath it with a large book, like a phone book works perfect. I cleaned a little bit of the powder off of my sandpaper before I start. Now on this particular canvas panel, I only want to sand off the extra paint that got on that tree. That tree just got larger and larger and larger. I really like the foreground, and I think I can redo this whole scene by just taking some of the paint off and repainting this tree. So I'm only going to repaint over the tree and probably a bit by the horizon line where the paint also got a little too thick. So those are the only places I'm going to sand, since those are the only places I'm going to repaint over. I'm getting the paint really smooth again, taking off all the bumps and lumps. The next step is to prepare our oil painting ground. And I put 3 piles on my canvas palette. I'm using a disposable palette because I'm just going to make a big mess and it's easy just to tear it off and throw it away. So in each of these 3 piles, I'm going to add some oil paint of different color. So I love red oxide. I'm going to add some to that, and some Gamblin gray medium to another pile. I can save a 3rd pile as plain white, or I'm thinking I might have a Venetian red. I have a nice tube of Venetian red, and I may have that be my 3rd pile today. So you just mix that in really well. As I said earlier, this ground from Gamblin comes out like marshmallow, and that's really too thick. So I thin it down with a syringe and some of my solvent. So I just put a few squirts in the pile. If you put this ground on straight out of the can, you end up with a real glossy surface, which makes it's very slippery, makes it hard for the paint to stick. But if I thin it down some, I can cover more panels and I have a much nicer surface to paint on. So I'm going to put some Venetian red into that 3rd pile so that I have 3 colors to choose from when I'm painting over my panels. I'm just going to mix that in real well, and then we'll be ready to paint. I'm using a Filbert 209 stiff bristle brush from Utrecht. It really allows me to push and get that paint into all the little crevices that might still be there even after sanding. I can thin as I go. If it still seems like that paint is too thick, I can put a little solvent on my brush to help it spread thinly and work it in. So I want to cover all the surfaces that are showing. Another way you can apply this ground is to use that big palette knife I had that I mixed the color up with and just smear it across the top of the panel and then use the brush to thin it out. So that's another technique for speeding things up a bit. This particular panel had a lot of paint on it, so I wanted to be sure I worked it into all those places. When I first started oil painting, I did paint very thick, so that's why I'm using the brush. I have a little bit more control than with the palette knife. I'm going to put on the ground just over the tree and some along the horizon line on this panel. This is Bayview. I just kept painting that tree. It got bigger and bigger and darker, and I think I can go back in and put in a different tree that's a little more interesting, because this one, when I look at it, it's just kind of boring. It doesn't have a lot of excitement. It's too evenly balanced, too evenly spaced, and rather than keep working with it, I'm just going to paint it out and start over again. But I really like the foreground and I like parts of the sky, so this is where you can do selective deletion. And I'm just going to put that ground on partial places on this canvas. And then I'll go back and paint in a new tree. On this canvas, which I already had sanded down, it's an 18 square, and I'm thinking I want to try some different colors on the canvas all together. So I'm going to use the gray, the Venetian red, and also the red oxide, and just put them in different places and see what effects that comes up with. The colors that are appearing here, the russet kind of soft grays, remind me of Soquel Creek as it looks in the winter, which is now. We're having a very dry year, so I can actually stand in the creek bed and look up the creek, and the trees are reddish color as they're dormant at this time. So I may take this panel down there, this canvas down there, and work on a creek scene when I'm done and it's dried, which may take a week or so. So take a hard look at all those canvases and canvas panels you have stored away with paintings on them and see which ones you can redo. Now, this particular painting was done over a repurposed panel with a gray. Before I went out on location, I put on a layer of liquid and some transparent Indian yellow. And this painting also was done on a repurposed canvas that I had done a mixture of grays and red oxide for the background and just left that color in the background. So here's a new painting.